You know, Rebels, if you've been checking out some of my promotional ads on social media, you'll be aware that I have been using a lot of AI programs to help me create ads. But you know what? There's a lot more uses for AI than just funny little videos. And I'd like to introduce one of our new sponsors, Podium. It is a leader in creating AI tools for podcasters. Now, let's say you've got a podcast, or maybe you're even thinking of doing a podcast. You're probably wondering, well, how can AI be integrated with your workflow? I'll tell you about Podium. As a podcaster, you know that writing show notes and creating chapters and transcribing episodes takes a lot of time, and it can cost you a lot of money too. But you know what? That's where Podium comes in. It's an AI tool designed specifically for creators and podcasters with the goal of making post-production tasks quick and easy. And in just a few minutes, Podium generates show notes, chapters, summaries, clips for social media, a full transcript, suggested episode titles, social media posts, and more. Whew, that's a lot of work for one little program. Your show notes are key to your podcast's success because it helps new listeners find your podcast and they'll know if it's a fit for them. You know, kind of like Too Many Podcasts. It also improves your SEO, that's your search engine optimization. Ooh, big phrase there. And overall accessibility. And with Podium, you can focus on creating a great podcast and let Podium's AI do the heavy lifting. But Podium isn't just for solo creators and podcasters. It's a game changer for editors, producers, marketers, agencies, and production studios. Teams that use Podiums are able to increase workloads, decrease turnaround times, and improve their quality. How does it work? Very easy. First, go to Podium's website, and you'll see that link that's right there in the show notes. You get 3 hours free just to try it. Pretty cool, huh? And using that link also supports this show as well. And you know what else happens? Because I'm a good guy. You use my link, you will get 50% off for your first month. So visit the site, upload an MP3 file, and download your files, and that's it. And if you need anything else, you can use Podium GPT to generate articles and any marketing copy you might need in seconds. Instant show notes, transcripts, chapters for your podcast or channel. This will level up that podcast. So check out Podium today.
Too Many Podcasts is brought to you in cooperation with the SJ Network. If you are a person who would like to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. We now direct you to the Sherpa Chalet, where we will turn it over to Jim the Podcast Sherpa. How he got this job is anyone's guess.
This week on Too Many Podcasts, it's a conversation with Charles and Doug of the Seeing Them Live podcast. Many of you listeners know that the Sherpa was once an avid concert goer, but he is no longer allowed in concert venues because during his younger years he once threw a phone at a performer, and it was still attached to the booth.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpa Illusion, and welcome to Too Many Podcasts. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios, attached to the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I look down below and discover all sorts of interesting podcasts for you. And if I'm lucky, I get some good people to talk to, kind of like my guests today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
Their names are Charles and Doug. They host a podcast called Seeing Them Live, and it is about the beauty of the live concert-going experience. Both of these guys are authors and have interesting guests with interesting stories on their show. You know, I'm sure we all go to concerts and we always end up with some of these really interesting stories that we end up telling our friends, you know, before we even go home with the concert t-shirt or whatever souvenir you may buy, along with memories of hopefully what was a good show. And we got to talk about all sorts of music and our concert experiences. And it's a really interesting conversation here. It really kind of took me back, reminiscing about some of the concert experiences that I've had over the years. I've seen a lot of groups, a lot of singers, all sorts of music too, as well. So it's really cool. So we are going to get to talk to Charles and Doug of Seeing Them Live. And right after that, it's been a while, but we are going to talk Sherpa samples. Yes, of course I've been listening to podcasts. What do you think I've been doing all this time? that we didn't do this in a while. Would I let that slide? Would I? I don't know. Would I? Let's just get on with the interview with Charles and Doug. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the ticket stub room of the Sherpa Chalet. My guests tonight are two gentlemen from Chicago. They are both authors and hosts of the podcast called Seeing Them Live, which is a celebration of going to live music and enjoying some incredible concerts. Their names are Charles and Doug. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, I guess we have to start off with the easy, obvious question. What was the greatest concert that you've been to so far?
Well,
Charles, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. I was thinking of that. I figured you might ask that. And it's hard to say. It depends what era, because I started going to concerts. My first one was in 1976, and I've been going ever since. So I would say early on, Pink Floyd. I saw the Animals tour in 1977 at Soldier Field in Chicago. It was a blessing and a curse because the production of that show was so incredible and mind-blowing was about 12 years old. Inflatable animals above the stadium and video playing the whole time. And so that was really cool. The only downside to that is then all other concerts that I went to were nowhere near that level.
You set the bar real high, huh?
Yeah. I was like, oh man. So yeah. But other concerts would include, I started going to see REM early on, and when they were first starting, and I was in college at the time, and Michael Stipe, the lead singer, he's just incredible to watch live, as is the whole band. And then Iggy Pop would probably fall in there as well. He's unbelievable live. You have to be in the room, to kind of experience it. Through the years, other bands kind of fill those spots as I move along, chronologically. But yeah, those are a few standouts.
Okay. Doug, how about you?
Well, I kind of have two categories. One would be maybe the best show that I've been to, and then there's bands that I really like that are my favorite bands. But, I go to see them because I like them, not necessarily because they have the best show, so to speak. But as far as the best show, and I've seen him twice, Don Henley from the Eagles. It was always really great musicianship, great sound. They always had really good sound. And, of course, he writes great songs. So this was during the period after the Eagles, I think right around the time he released Building the Perfect Beast, which was one of his very successful solo albums.
Boys of Supper.
That show kind of stood out, and I saw him twice. As far as favorite bands that I go and see, Billy Joel I've seen numerous times, and he really puts on a good show. Heart is one of my favorite bands. And the Smithereens is another band I've seen twice. Once actually, I actually met Charles at a Smithereens show at one of the local villages around here. Where they have those village festivals, and they played there. And that's where I met Charles the first time.
I was gonna say, was that the first time I met you? I think. Right?
I think so. It was in Brookfield. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
And this was years before the seed of the podcast even came about.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I remember a while back. I guess I was probably, I would say safely in my 20s when a friend of mine said, you're going to come with us to this local bar and see this band. He says, I don't care if you like them or not. He says, I want you to be able to say you saw them before they hit it big. And it was Twisted Sister. And so I went, and I thought they were okay. That metal isn't really my my forte with with loving music, but I mean they put on one heck of a show. I mean, one of those groups that falls in the category of having the audience in the palm of their hand,
Right.
And oddly enough, like so many years later, I've become online friends with Dee Snider's son Jesse, who comes on the show every once in a while.
That kind of fits something I wrote a blog article called "The Intimate Magic of Small Venue Music" that's on our website.
Mhm.
And I've always felt that the best value for your live music dollar is the smaller local venues.
Sure.
And I went through and cited a lot of situations like that where a lot of people that are very big now, they all started out in places like that.
Mhm.
Of course, if you want to see Taylor Swift, you have to take out a mortgage on your home, to go see her. But at one time, she played at a place called the Bluebird in Nashville, it's known for being kind of a launching pad for a lot of
Right.
people, in that community. But at the time, she wasn't big, and she started there. And currently the cost to go to the Bluebird is the cover is like $12 to $20.
Mhm.
So that's what I try to encourage people is, go to your local small venues. And also I play in a band. I'm a bass player in a local band called Wrought Iron Soul. And so obviously, we just do, cover music, classic rock covers. And those are the kind of places that we play in all the time. But it really is the best value for your music dollars to go to those small local venues.
Yeah, and I guess while you're mentioning it, Doug, you actually have an album out too.
Yeah, I do. It's all instrumental music. It's called Flagstone. So if you go to dougflorzik.com, you can have a listen, to those songs. It sort of falls into kind of, I guess, some people call it chill music, some people call it smooth jazz. But yeah, it was on my bucket list to get done, and kind of COVID gave me a reason to focus on some of the things on my bucket list, and that's when I actually finished it off. I've been working on it for basically like 10 years, and I finally kicked myself in the pants and got it done.
Now, are people going to get to see you live?
Well, if they come to the Chicago area, my band plays locally, in the west suburbs. So yeah, if you come to Chicago, look up Wrought Iron Soul and see where we're playing.
I would also like to add that Doug's music from his album is featured on the introduction of each of our episodes. And then also the outro is a different song from Doug's album. So
right.
He provides all the music.
If you're going to work with a musician and you got it right next to you, why not, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, Charles, actually, the experience of your first concert of going to see the Eagles, that seems to be where everything sort of germinated from. Is that right?
Yeah, and it was just a fluke, really. My parents were going with my aunt and uncle because I was 11 at the time, and this was right before Hotel California came out.
Mm-hmm.
They're releasing that shortly thereafter, and my dad got sick and couldn't go. So my mom asked me if I wanted to go, and I said sure. And yeah, it was really incredible. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. I at the time I hadn't gone to like really a lot of professional sporting events and such. So like just the crowd and the music, and back then people had cigarette lighters instead of their phones for for the encore and stuff. And I thought it was so cool. And then of course I bought my first concert T-shirt there, and yeah, I just kept going whenever I could. And my mom, Doug and I refer to her as a concert mom, and we have an article on our blog about that as well. But she took me and my friends then from that point forward to lots of concerts, and she's always known as the cool mom. She bringing me and my friends to these concerts. One of which was that Pink Floyd concert, which not only was it an incredible concert, but by all accounts, even from the band, Roger Waters said that it was oversold by like 30,000 people. So unofficial estimates at Soldier Field was supposed to be about 65,000, but there was actually, they say, about 95,000 people there.
Wow.
And there's a picture of it, an aerial photograph on Reddit. And when you look at that photograph and all those people in that stadium, it's unbelievable. And looks a little dangerous, to be honest. But I think back at that and I'm like, I can't believe she took me to see that, because yeah, my mom's, she's like 5'2" and, managing through the crowd, the crowd of all these people with her 11-year-old son. But yeah, that's how it all kind of started.
There's a link to that photo that Charles is talking about on our website. If you go there, seeingthemlive.com, and you go to what we call the artifacts section. So whenever we have either links or photos or pictures of ticket stubs or whatever, they're what we call artifacts of the interview, whatever interview it was connected to.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that we did with Heidi, Charles' mom, we have a link to that photo available so people can go and see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. And part of their website, the seeingthemlive.com, you have a collection of the ticket stubs, as you mentioned. I'm curious, are there any ticket stubs that you probably wish that you never purchased and maybe avoided?
That's a question. There were certain concerts that weren't, I'll file them under not my cup of tea,
mm-hmm.
and things I went to with friends, just, to go along with them. But yeah, no, I've kept just about every single ticket, if there was a ticket to keep. I have a fairly large ticket stub collection of concerts that I've been to over the years.
I can't really say that there's any that I've gone to that I didn't like. I mean, similar to what Charles said, there's been some cases where somebody convinced me to go see a band and it was okay, but it wasn't like somebody I wanted to go see again.
Right.
So kind of more falls into that category. But I can't say I've had a really bad experience at any show.
During the Prince Purple Rain tour, he played on Long Island, and it said on the ticket stub, "Wear something purple." We went and saw him. Sheila E. was the opening act. She was fantastic. That lady knew how to put on a show. I mean, between the drum playing and interacting with the audience, phenomenal. And everyone was waiting for Prince, and it was like he reenacted his music videos. He didn't interact with the crowd. He didn't say thank you. He didn't acknowledge. It was like, well, I'm going to reenact my videos and see you later. And that was basically the whole show. And it was such a disappointment. I was like, I've heard so many great things about him. And my friend had seen him the following tour where he said it was the exact opposite of what we just saw.
Yeah, Jim, you're the first person Doug and I have interviewed, I don't know, a handful of people who have seen Prince, and they all loved it, so you're the first person who's kind of giving it a mixed review.
And I like his music too. It's not,
Yeah,
it was like, wow, what a letdown.
Yeah. That would fall under your most disappointing, maybe. Right?
Absolutely. Now, we should say that, Seeing Them Live is really about the listeners' concert going experiences and some wild things that have happened. Did you guys have like a favorite episode or favorite story in the shows that you've done so far?
Well, not to sound too wishy-washy, but I think, I think each episode in its own right is really, I really like all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's they're just all different. We had this guy called we call him the gig master, Roger Merlo out of London, and he just turned 75 not too long ago. He's a retired car mechanic, and he goes to hundreds of concerts a year. he sees his record was six concerts or six bands in one night at six different venues, and his story of how he started out, and just this arc of live music, and then how after he retired, he this is like his hobby, and it was kind of really inspiring for me in particular, like thinking, God, when I retire, I will have all this free time on my hands, and this would be a great thing to do every night, go out to see bands, and so that was really a cool one. But like I said, they're all great. We had this young girl, Emma. She's a youngest. Doug and I called her the youngest concert photographer in the world. She's 8 years old. Her dad, Barry, is a concert photographer for Rolling Stone magazine and such. And Doug and I bumped into them at the House of Blues in Chicago while they were working. And this girl's 8 years old, and she's seen all these concerts and met all of these bands. It's incredible. It's
more bands than
really
Charles and I put together.
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, just and she's so sweet, and that's a great one. But like I said, they all have something that stands out. Once people give you the list of, like, Doug and I have this form that you fill out on the website, and based on the information, then we start asking questions, and we piece together this interview, like this timeline, and kind of do a little bit of back and forth so people know what we're going to ask. And the dates in people's heads, even ours are, they get foggy after years of not thinking about it. And then we just make these connections, and with the music and the concerts, and it's just everybody's got their own story. That's our tagline, right, Doug? Everybody has a concert story.
Yeah.
And someday we'll hear yours.
Someday we'll hear yours. Yeah.
I do have one, and actually it was in our first show with Tom Fitzer is actually in my band. He's the lead singer and rhythm guitar player in my band.
Okay.
And he told a story. There's a place or a suburb around us called Lisle, and they have sort of like their park area. They have like a concert shell, but it's kind of like on like a peninsula. So you got to imagine it's a man-made lake, and you've got this concert shell that pops out in the lake on a peninsula. Okay. So it was Steppenwolf was playing there, and so he got a few beers in him, and he told his friends, he says, well, I'm going to swim up to that stage and I'm going to sing with John Kay of Steppenwolf. And that's exactly what he did. So he swam up to the stage, gets on stage, okay, and the band's looking at him, and John Kay's in the middle of a song, and he goes up and he puts his arm around John Kay, and John Kay lets him sing into the mic. And then by this time, security has shown up, and so they start coming for him. And what does he do? He basically waves goodbye, goes back, jumps back in the lake, swims back to the shore. And of course, by then the police were waiting for him there. But they were very cool about it. They basically just kicked him out, and he left. But I always thought that was a pretty wild story. And he had several other really good ones. That's a great episode to listen to. That's our very first episode that we aired about a year ago.
Please tell me that he was singing Born to Be Wild with him.
That would be perfect. But do you remember, Charles, what the song was? He told us, but
it was I think it was The Pusher Man is what he said. Maybe.
Something like that. Yeah, it's one of his favorites. But
Doug and I call that the ultimate stage dive.
Right, exactly.
Literally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Go right back into the water. So that is a good episode.
I love it. Now, Charles, you made a reference to something which I found really interesting. And you were saying, like, when you went to see the Eagles, how people lit their cigarette lighters And and I'm sure like you guys were in an era like when you went to a concert, you had to have that concert T-shirt, that exact one, to
Yeah.
show everybody the next day that you were there. And what do you think like the state of live music is now as compared to like back then, where it was, I think, a little more organic with stuff like that, with little like almost like tropes of going to a concert.
Yeah, you say organic. That's that's interesting because it reminds me of seeing Iron Maiden. I saw them back in the early '80s, and of course, this is before social media or websites or anything. And we saw them open up for the Scorpions at a place called Alpine Valley, and it was one of these rare occasions where the band destroys the opening act, or the opening act destroys the main act. And whenever we would go see Iron Maiden after that, the crowd was always huge, and they had no airplay or, again, no social media, so it was like more of word of mouth kind of thing, which was kind of cool. But then on the flip side, when you go to buy a concert shirt back then, which I had tons of concert shirts. I could wear a different concert shirt every day of the month. And you pay cash, and some guy throws you the T-shirt. And now it's like, I remember I went to see the Lumineers before the pandemic with my wife. There's no cash, all credit cards, and they put my T-shirt in a nice little gift bag, and it was very very polished, so to speak. But going to see live music is still, kind of the same thing. Like Doug was saying, I preferred going to, the smaller clubs.
Yeah.
But I have seen Harry Styles, which was very interesting and entertaining. Kind of at the same level as Taylor Swift, almost, kind of that vibe. But yeah, things are a little different, but in a lot of ways they're still, very much the same.
What are your thoughts on this, Doug?
Well, it's funny you're mentioning about the T-shirts, and I still think that's very big. And as a matter of fact, a lot of bands these days, that's the only way that they can support themselves is through the merchandise. Because the problem with the streaming method of getting music is that, I know this, not that my music is, streamed at the same level as a lot of these other big bands, but you get maybe a tenth of a penny or something for every stream, whereas before, at least if somebody bought an album for $12 or whatever, or a CD, the artist would get maybe at least half that or something, or even a quarter of that. So that's a real problem as far as, music, trying to create a environment where artists can support themselves. So for instance, we just recently had Zuzu Mansour is the lead singer of a band called Soraya. It's a fairly popular band, primarily on the East Coast. They're signed to Stephen Van Zant's Wicked Cool Records label. And we had her on the show, and she was talking about how they have some fans that are just fanatical about buying their merchandise. They buy like every vinyl album they put out. They buy every T-shirt they have. They had this idea to have this thing called a vault, which was like, they have all these like first take recordings and things, and they put it all together and they package it up, and people are willing to pay hundreds of dollars for that. So that's an example of how a lot of bands, the only way they can support themselves in some ways is to have these other side things and to try to, sell the merchandise and everything. So I think that's kind of making it harder for bands to get started and to emerge, at least as far as being able to work on it full time and make a real career out of it. So I think it's changed a little bit. In some ways, it's easier because you can always, we have the tools now. You can record yourself. Like I recorded my own album and did that myself. But that also means that if everybody can do it, then you have all this competition and all this material out there, and it's a lot harder to cut through.
And Jim, I'll add too, like we mentioned concert t-shirts. Now the vintage concert t-shirts are worth, hundreds of dollars. Like that, I've got an Iron Maiden t-shirt from the early 80s, which is worth like $800 or $900 now. And my daughter wanted, she's 13, she wanted to wear a Rolling Stones shirt. She wanted to buy a new one because it had that logo with the tongue and stuff. Sure. So I pulled out my 1981 Rolling Stones shirt. She didn't like it because it was, it was more subtle, but I'm like, hey man, this is the real deal, but she wanted something else. So, but yeah, that market is incredible. People paying lots of money for vintage concert shirts.
It's funny how like a lot of that artwork has just become like, even like old years later, how it becomes such like a marketing tool, even for like, the Gap or even, clothing sites that are just like, look, we have this logo, like you said, the Rolling Stones, or, the logo for Iron Maiden with the skeleton. I know there's a name. I forgot what the guy's name is. And, stuff like that. The Beatles, the same thing with like the Let It Be cover.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could go into Target and there's Def Leppard shirts and Smashing Pumpkin shirts and Nirvana shirts, it's
and it's funny because I'm going to fairly presume that three of us, like if we mention to some people, like could they actually name all four Beatles and know what instruments they played?
Right.
Some people are kind of like, who?
Yeah, you see somebody wearing a Black Sabbath T-shirt. It's like, if you can name me one member of Black Sabbath, and I'm not going to give you Ozzy because you probably know that one. But yeah, it's fun.
When you guys aren't doing your podcast, are there other podcasts that you guys like to listen to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a frequent listener of Sound Opinions with Greg Kot, Jim DeRogatis. They were both music critics for the Chicago Sun-Times and the Tribune. I also, some of our guests that Doug and I have interviewed, were podcasters, and they were music podcasters. And now, I listen to them regularly. Like there's one called the Rock Talk Studio with Big Rick. That's a great one. He reviews books about rock and roll books, documentaries, things of that nature. And then Music Notes with Jess. She does all of the trending pop music, mostly some country and such, rock also, weekly, what's trending weekly. And then just recently we had a guy on, he has a podcast called An Avid Listener, where he connects these dots of musicians and from one band to the other and albums and, people playing together that you didn't realize were all on the same album, kind of a thing. So that's kind of interesting. Doug, do you have some you?
Yeah, I'm going to throw you a curve because I have one that may sound kind of boring to everyone else, but I don't know if anybody's heard of Planet Money. Okay. It's about economics, but they make it really interesting. And I really love Planet Money. I listen to it quite a bit, and they take economics and they're able to tell a story around it. And it makes you understand a lot of the things that we interact with every day, but we don't really understand all of the little gears and everything that lead to why you pay for, something and what you pay for it and the supply chain that gets it there and all of those types of things. So I'm a big fan of Planet Money, but I also like Rock Talk Studio. I mean, I really just discovered it when we had Rick on the show, and he has a really good podcast. It's interesting. He has very intelligent analysis of the books that he reads and the documentaries that he sees, and it's I've actually gone and bought a couple of books because of his reviews.
So while I got you here, before we get to shameless self-promotion, I'm curious, is there a concert that would have taken place in history that you wish you were at?
Well, I mean, obviously, I kind of think, I'm not sure I'd probably want to be in the back so I could get out or something, but Woodstock, I mean, just to see it, I don't think I would want to be around, the poor sanitary conditions that they had there for very long, but to see it, I think that would have been something. I would have liked to have seen Prince. I would have liked, I would have liked to have seen, the Beatles, of course, when they were all together. So those would be some examples of some things I could think of off the top of my head.
I had an old coworker who saw them in Shea Stadium, and he said, you couldn't hear a thing. He was way up. He said it was 20 minutes of screaming and the show was over.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right, based on what I've seen in videos and stuff.
How about you, Charles? You have a dream concert that you wish you were at?
Yeah, I mean, I guess certain groups or people I would, I in my book, I have an area called regrets. And of course I start that with Sinatra. I had an opportunity to see him, but I had another commitment, couldn't go. Leonard Skinner, same kind of thing. Those were like two I had an opportunity to go to, and I didn't for one reason or another. I don't know, maybe somebody like Jimi Hendrix would be really interesting to see. The Doors, yeah. It's a good question. I have a lot of bands running through my head right now, but
we'll both think of like 10 or 15 after we get off of this show. And I forgot about them. Yeah, I mean, I'll throw it out a couple more. I mean, the band would be. I would have loved to have seen them. The Allman Brothers when they were, all together. Those are a couple of, as far as musicians, as a musician, those are bands that you love and you emulate, and we play some of their material too. And I mean, there's a reason why Eric Clapton spent most of his career always wanting to be a part of the band, because they were just that good. So to see them live, I think that would have been really nice.
Yeah, I think Live Aid would have been a cool one to see, with all those bands,
yes,
that were there. That would be.
That flows in my top 5.
Yeah.
Okay, before I let you guys go, we have the portion of the show, and it is called Shameless Self-Promotion, and this is where you can let everybody know how they can follow you and get in touch with the things you guys are into.
Shameless self-promotion. Shameless self-promotion.
Doug, why don't you start out with that?
Well, if you want to check out any of my music, it's available on most of the major streaming platforms. You just go by my last name, Florzak, Florzak. You can go to dougflorzak.com. That links it into Bandcamp, where you can also hear it. As I mentioned, my band, Wrought Iron Soul, plays locally in Chicago. If you come out to Chicago, we mostly play in the western suburbs, but you can do a Google search and see, if we're playing that weekend. And of course, the podcast. But I'll let Charles tell everybody more about the podcast.
Well, I have a book out called Ticket Stub Stories, a memoir of live music. And it chronicles my concert experiences over the last 4+ decades, with lots of ticket stub images in there are sprinkled throughout. And that was kind of it sparked the idea for the Seeing Them Live podcast, because towards in one part of the book, I have the opportunity to meet Stephen Perkins, who's the drummer of Jane's Addiction, and on the sidewalk in Chicago outside of his hotel. And I got a picture of him, because of the two of us. And later on that day, my wife was chatting with me, and she said, "What would you, if you had a chance to talk to him, what would you, or have a conversation, what would you have talked to him about?" And I kind of was drawing a blank, like, well, I'm not a musician, I'm not a drummer. I have everything they've ever recorded, but I don't think he wants to really talk about his band. And then I thought, well, I'd ask him what was his first concert he went to, and why did he go, and who was he with? And, you can always, no matter who the person is, they usually have, a concert story or a love of some kind of music. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we could maybe find common ground with. And that was kind of sparked the idea for the podcast then.
Absolutely. All right, so Doug and Charles, the name of the podcast again is Seeing Them Live. Make sure you guys check it out on your favorite podcast app because they're out there, and go visit their website and see all the cool things that they have. Guys, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now it's time for Sherpa Samples. If you've got a podcast you'd like us to sample, contact us and we'll mention your name on the show.
Once again, it's time for Sherpa Samples, and that's when your Sherpa, that's me, takes a dive into the podcast charts that are out there. So what is it that I've listened to? Census Working Overtime is hosted by David Cross, and it's an interview show. Now, if the name sounds familiar, he was on the show Arrested Development, and he's also a comedian, I believe. And in this episode, he interviews Russ Tamblyn, who was in West Side Story, if I'm not mistaken. And he's also David Cross's father-in-law. He is married to actress Amber Tamblyn. Crash Course Pods The Universe is hosted by a writer named John Green, along with an astrophysicist named Dr. Katie Mack, and they actually talk about the formation of the universe. It's definitely like an astrophysics course in a podcast, so I guess I'll be getting into even more detailed stuff. The episode that I listened to had to do with the actual formation of the universe and actually what happened right before the formation of the universe. Kind of heady stuff, but if you're into science like that, definitely check it out. You Be Trippin' is hosted by Ari Shafir, who is a comedian, and he talks about all the places that he's traveled in the world, and he has other comedic guests and folks on the show talking about their travels as well. And he had comedian Dave Attell on this episode. And they were talking about a lot of the USO shows that he did. Here Comes the Guillotine is hosted by 3 Scottish comedians, 2 men and 1 woman, and they talk about a lot of British politics and society stuff, and you'd probably get it a lot better, I think, if you lived over there and you knew what was going on and you read their papers. They've all got very thick Scottish accents, so you want to be very careful when you're listening if you have a hard time following with that. Like I say with some shows that are from Britain, and I say that they're very British, meaning that I usually don't get the humor. It's a very Scottish show. I'll put it that way. But they seem to be amusing each other, so that's all that counts, as long as they're having fun. The School of Greatness is hosted by Lewis Howes, and he interviews people who have created great things in society. The interview that I caught was his talk with rocker John Bon Jovi. So he's pretty great, right? I like his stuff. And he's still kicking it after 40-something years, so definitely got something going on there. And for some of our other stories, we had The Price of Paradise. And this is when a family from Britain sells their estate and moves to an island near South America. So you wonder what could possibly go wrong. What could possibly go wrong? Well, this podcast, of course, does dive deep into that, and it's a pretty wild story. Inconceivable Truth is a podcast that is hosted by a guy named Matt Katz, and he is an investigative journalist who actually sets out to find his biological father, and the podcast has to do with what happens when he encounters him and all the things that he finds out about himself and about his father as well. Boyfriend Material is hosted by a guy named Harry Jowsey. Now, Harry Jowsey is, I guess, more well-known in Australia, so this one's for our friends who are Down Under. I think he did a lot of the Bachelor and Love Island shows or whatever, those type of dating shows, and he became pretty well known. So he decided to host a podcast, and he talks about relationships in this podcast. Another one that deals with some relationships is Caleb Heron, and he hosts a podcast called So True. He has a lot of different guests on, and they talk about all different subjects, not strictly dating, but all sorts of stuff. He's a comedian. He's pretty goofy, and that's what that podcast is about. And lastly, The Interview. That's a New York Times podcast. And guess what happens? It's an interview, of course. Who is the guest on this episode that I listened to? It is actress Anne Hathaway, who I think just came out with a new movie on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. And she talks about all different stuff in her career. And it's an interesting interview, especially if you want to hear someone do an incredible Adam Sandler impression. And I'm talking about Anne Hathaway doing this impression. I can't even try it. Some refreshing H2O. I don't know, it doesn't work. Anyway, why don't we head on out of here into the outro? Let's go!
Be a rebel. Follow the show at Sherpolution on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
A very special thanks to Charles and Doug. Make sure you check out their podcast. Again, the name of the show is called Seeing Them Live, and have a listen or even visit their website. And while you're there, you can check out their ticket stub collection. I've got an interesting collection of tickets in my pocket. Let me see. Let's go through here. Okay, let's see. Okay, this one I better pay. This one I might have to fight in court. That one is kind of 2023. How did that one end up in there? I don't know. Okay. Oh, well, anyway, it looks like I've got some things to do here, so we'll be back next week. New episode, old episode, I don't know. It'll be one of those, but make sure you come back. Drop me a message on Sherpolution.com on either Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever you can leave me a message, and let me know what one of your favorite concert experiences is. I'd really be curious to hear about that. And maybe if I get enough responses, I can tell you about a concert story that I really did experience when I was in high school. Oh, those years ago, yes. They had concerts back then, believe it or not. Okay, I better take care of some of these things in my pocket. Just like wash my pants or something like that. Lord Mr. Bruce, you can handle it from here. See you guys next time. And until then, viva la Sherpolution.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpolution. Viva la Sherpolution. Oh. Yo, come back now, you hear?